Politico and Morning Consult recently teamed up for a poll that they conducted in late July with nearly 2,000 registered voters, and they found that former Vice President Joe Biden actually is outperforming Donald Trump in hypothetical 2020 matchups by 7 percentage points. Now, what's the underlying implication when you see a headline like this? I mean, clearly, if Joe Biden is in the title, then obviously he must have performed better than other 2020 presidential contenders, like Bernie Sanders, like Elizabeth Warren, and even Kirsten Gillibrand and Kamala Harris. Now, here's what Politico says about the specific poll. Former Vice President Joe Biden leads President Trump by 7 percentage points in a head-to-head matchup, according to a new Politico Morning Consult poll. The percentage of Democrats who would choose Biden, 80%, was slightly higher than the 78% of Republicans who would vote for the president's re-election. The former vice president who ran for the White House in 1988 and 2008 has been floated as a 2020 contender, and Biden himself has said he's not ruling out a third try. So the overall implication is that since Joe Biden performed so well, 7 points, that's a pretty good lead, right? Since he performed so well in a head-to-head matchup against Donald Trump, then clearly he's got to be the front runner, right? Because if he's the one who is front and center of this article, then he obviously must have outperformed individuals like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. However, there's something really peculiar about this poll that I found when I dived into the methodology and really looked at the questioning. This poll excludes Bernie Sanders. Excludes him. It excludes every other potential 2020 contender as well, including Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. And what's interesting is that if you look at the poll itself, you'll see that Joe Biden does in fact lead Donald Trump by a 7-point margin. However, he actually performs worse than a nameless generic Democrat option who beats Trump by a 13-point margin, which implies that Biden isn't the best option to go against Donald Trump, even if they kind of made him the centerpiece of this particular article. But nonetheless, the title frames it as if Joe Biden is the frontrunner, when in actuality, that implication is wrong. Now, to be fair, the article does actually point this out. They state that he doesn't do as well as a generic nameless Democrat option. However, the problem is that we live in an age where people look at titles and they draw all the conclusions that they think they need from that title. They don't really dive into the details of articles. We all kind of do this. I'm guilty of this as well. So what's going to happen? Inevitably, the reason why we care about this is because individuals who are trying to shove Joe Biden down our throats, who are trying to make the case for Joe Biden, another corporate establishment Democrat, they're going to share articles like this. Look, if you want to beat Donald Trump, Joe Biden is the man to go up against Donald Trump. But that poll doesn't say how well Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren would perform against Donald Trump. Furthermore, what's interesting is that the poll itself doesn't exclusively focus on 2020. It was kind of a general poll that gauged where the American people stood in general on several issues, as well as their approval of Donald Trump and whatnot. So, the fact that the entire article was framed in a manner that implied Joe Biden was the front runner, look, this is something that I worry could be used to demoralize progressives in the same way that it did in 2016 when we saw things like, the AP calling the race in certain states for Hillary Clinton before voters even casted all of their votes yet. If you see this and you're a voter and voting is already a chore and you have to bypass voter suppression laws in certain states, or voter ID laws and voter suppression in certain states, if voting is a chore and you don't think the candidate you support has a chance anyway, then what's going to be the conclusion for a lot of people? They're going to think, well, it doesn't matter. Bernie Sanders isn't going to win anyway, so why come out and vote for him? That's what I'm worried about, and I think that a large portion of the problem with Bernie Sanders and really progressives in general was that they didn't think he had a chance, so they didn't bother to really support him. We saw this with Bill Maher, where somebody asked him a question in an overtime statement and said, look, if Bernie Sanders can win both Iowa and New Hampshire, does this mean that he actually has a chance against Hillary Clinton? And what was Bill Maher's response? No. So people really respond to articles like this in a negative way, in a way that hurts progressives, because if they don't think someone like Bernie Sanders is going to win anyway, then odds are they're just not going to come out and support him. So look, if you honestly want to defeat Donald Trump and you're part of the establishment, or you're part of, a really large news outlet, you can't do things like this. I mean, sure, you can state the results of this poll, but don't make it seem as if Joe Biden is the individual to beat. It seems as if what they're trying to do is shove Joe Biden down our throats in the same way that they tried to shove Hillary Clinton down our throats. And that's completely unacceptable. You have to allow voters to make their choice. But as we've seen time and again, the Democratic Party doesn't want voters to make their choice. They want to make our choice for us and then tell us, vote for who we've selected, or, you're a Donald Trump sympathizer. You're helping the Republicans. That's what they do. And it's a really sleazy, disingenuous tactic. So at the end of the day, we do have to be cautious. I would encourage individuals to look at these polls and dive into the methodology, dive into the details, look at the numbers, look at the sample size, look at the margin of error. And furthermore, another really important thing that I think we all need to kind of emphasize when we're looking at polls is that individual polls, I think that they're useful. They can give us some insight into where voters are at, but overall, I think that aggregate polling data is a lot more stable, so we should probably focus more on that and not put too much stock into any individual poll, even though sometimes it's difficult, right? Because if you see a poll with the results that you like showing that Bernie is ahead, that might get people excited. But really, we have to be overly cautious, because we know what the establishment did. We know what corporate media outlets did in 2016, and they're already showing us that they're planning on doing it again. And even if they're not doing this on purpose, maybe they're unwittingly framing this article in a way to demoralize progressives. Maybe they don't think that will be a consequence of this, but when you have this poll that focuses on a lot of issues, they could have made the headline about Donald Trump and his approval rating, or, a generic Democrat, but they didn't do that. They decided to center this entire article on Joe Biden, and I think there's an underlying agenda there. I think there's a pro-corporate agenda, a pro-neoliberal agenda, and it's an agenda that is ultimately going to try to get us to accept whoever the establishment puts forward, and that's just not acceptable. And it wouldn't behoove the Democratic Party establishment to do that, because it could backfire. I mean, we don't need to keep relitigating 2016, but these are important examples. We have to look to history so we don't have history repeating itself. So I just wanted to point this out because I thought that this was really, really a disingenuous article.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.